Good day to all of you, and thank you, Lissy, to invite me to give a presentation. It's really a privilege for me to be here and share my information on policy formulation and implementation. When you hear policies, I know in nursing, they just ignore it or you just move on. And a lot of them, they don't want to hear the policy, the name policy. But I hope I'm going to change your opinion about policy today. And I was also like that, you've just put the policy away somewhere. But let's start off and let's look at the agenda. First, I'm going to introduce to you the policy, what policy is. Just want to get this one off here, sorry. Then we're going to talk about the types of policies. There's different types of policies. The importance of policies, why we need that, why it's so important for us, and the policy making cycle, and then the requirements for policy analysis. And I've just put that in for the nursing staff that's here and listening to it. Because it's coming out of the policy making cycle, and you will see it later when we get to that point. And then policy formulation, and the two points that I'm going to emphasize is the agenda setting and the design of the policy when you formulate a policy. Now, and then the last one is the policy implementation, which is a very important part of policies, but it's also not a very difficult situation, very difficult to implement the policy. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to conclude. So in a book that was written by Kluter and de Kooning, the book on improving public policies, they wrote this, the following on policies, public policies. And they say it's a public sector statement of intent, including sometimes a more detailed program of action to give effect to selected normative and empirical goals in order to improve or resolve perceived problems and needs in society in a specific way, thereby achieving desired changes in the society. Now, when you read that, there's a lot of words, there's a lot of things that they link to each other, and I'm sure some of you are a little bit confused now. I just want to say the whole presentation is based on public policies, public health policies. And from there, we can apply it in whether you're in the nursing manager or a hospital manager or a pharmacy manager, you can apply that then. And we're going to work through it, and that you can see how you can apply that. Now, what that statement is saying is that there's problems and perceived problems in a society, and the society may have needs, and they want to resolve those problems, and they want to fulfill the needs of the society. And that's why they create a policy with the intent to be successful in achieving the changes make changes in the society. That's basically what it's saying. But let's look further at the introduction. Health policies is essential for good governance, but not always seen as important by healthcare workers. And that is what I said earlier on, and I was at that point myself, that you know about the policies, and you ask, do you have a policy for this? Yes, we have it. It's there in a file. That they get the policy, they must read it, and they must go through the policy, but they don't have time, or they're not interested, and it just gets as a file in the office or file in a ward. And then when there's inspection from Department of Health or from the COSASA or whoever, and they ask the staff, do you have a policy on this and this? They will say, yes, we do have. And I said, where is it? Show me. Then they totally lost. And that is why it's so important that we know policies. We know what type of policies we have. Sometimes I said yes to the people doing inspection, but there's no policy, such a policy. So because I don't know what's going on, it's important that we know. Then reviewing of policy is also very important, specifically if there are changes in the external and internal environment. And there's constant change in the environment, specifically external environment. It's got a huge impact on the policies, how we formulate the policies. Then policy manuals must be easily accessible for staff, be in the categories with a clear index. If we don't make it accessible for the staff, then we can't expect them to know what's in the policies. And that it must be a very clear index that they can, when they want to see a policy, go immediately, look at the index and find the policy. Then explain what should be done in certain situations. This is the policy. In the policy, you actually giving guidelines for the people involved, what to do when they're in a certain situation. And I will come back to that as we carry on. And it's also a policy and action plan for future solution in order to change a perceived problem. Now, we can't just look at what's happening now, what's the problem now, what are the needs now, and just create a plan for that. We must look a little bit further. We must do some forecasting to cover that otherwise we're going to keep on changing policies. So let's look at the types and levels of policies. Most of the staff I've experienced that's in government hospitals and institutions, they are of the opinion that the policy is only coming from the highest authority, from the government, from the state, the province that they are working in, and local authorities. Now, it's true, the majority of policies that you in government institutions receive and should have are from Department of Health or national policies. So it's applicable to the whole country, all the health components in the country, even the private sector. But they're not the only people that provide policies that's got problems that want to solve. The next step is the Department of Managing Directors. They can also create a policy if they see there's a need for a policy because there's a problem that keep on repeating and they want to solve it in their specific institution that they're responsible for. They can formulate a policy for those institutions to solve the problem. Then we get further down to the nursing component. Also the nurse director or nursing manager, she can also formulate a policy based on the problems in the institution. Now, where the managing director's policies will be for all the departments in the institution that's involved. With the nursing, it will only be applicable or only focus on the nursing departments in the institution. So her type of policies will be focusing on nursing aspects. Then there's the operational managers in the wards, and they can then have the policy from the higher authority. They've got the policies from the managing director or the CEO or hospital manager, these different names that we call them. And they have a policy from the nursing manager, but still there's a problem only in her department that keeps on repeating and she wants to solve this. Then she can also have a special instruction for that specific ward, how to deal with that problem. And as we go through, I will give you some examples. The purposes of policy. This is very important for us. And I'm talking now specifically to the nursing staff, but it's also applicable to the other people. There are 11 reasons why we must have policies and why we must know our policies and not ignore it. The first one is that it helps us to achieve our objectives in the health services. What the objectives are to get there, it helps you with that. And you will see when you go through the policies, there's always goals and objectives included. Then secondly, it prevents temporary problems from becoming permanent problems. And it's so often that you've got a temporary problem, but it keeps on coming up, and then you just ignore it. And that will become a permanent problem later on if you don't do anything about it. And what can you do? You can solve the problem by formulating policy based on that problem. Then protect the health service by stating a desire to comply with laws. If you formulate a policy, you must always take the legislation, take that in consideration. And specifically from a nursing point, you must keep in mind and look at the Nursing Act and the requirements from the nursing from SANC, specifically the regulations that's applicable to that specific problem. And you must refer to them and you must use those information to build on that. So you must comply with the laws. Management to give a deep thought. The management sometimes they just quickly want to make a decision. They don't think really about it in depth. But with a policy, it really forces you to think deeply about what you need to solve this problem. And then you must look at the needs of the organization, but also the needs of the employees. And you must balance the two, the organization and the employees. You can't just look at the organization, and you can't just look at the employees. So that's also an advantage of the policy. Then consistent treatment of all healthcare professionals throughout the organization. Now I'm going to give you an example of consistent treatment. With the policy, they try to get to a point where hopefully two managers with the same in the same situation with the same problem will manage it exactly the same. For example, that I will give you is with disciplinary hearings. If you have it's a disciplinary hearing, you have to discipline one of your staff member as say operational manager. Then you must follow the guidelines of disciplinary hearings, and it's available in all the institutions. So, and it's very specific what you're allowed to do, what you're not to do, what's the rights of a person that you actually discipline, and so forth. So you must follow those. And then even with the outcomes, you must look at what was, why did you discipline this person? And then the outcome must be based on that to be fair and justice. But 2 weeks later, there's another operational manager who has to discipline one of the staff members. She has to follow the same way and the same steps than the first one. It must be exactly the same. And the outcome, it will depend on how serious that situation is. But they must act and exactly the same. Must be even if you don't have a lot of problems with a staff member, you are disciplining. You must be fair and you must be consistent of what the other people are doing. So in other words, the staff will feel more at, I can't say at home, but they will say that they're consistent and they treat us fairly. It doesn't matter who you are, and that's important. Then continuity of actions is assured, or even though senior management may change. You've got your policies in your institution, then the manager resigns and there's a new manager coming, whether it's a hospital manager, operational manager, or whoever, and that person has got a different management way of managing, and she wants to change something, and you get sometimes that person, the moment they walk in, they want to make changes immediately, and it's never good. You have to wait and see and experience before you can do it. But with even if it's a change in management, the actions, the policy will stay the same. There won't be changes, maybe at a later stage, but there's continuity of actions that's been described in the policies. Serve as a standard of performance. Now, policies, they give you a guideline. A guideline is actually the standard that they expect from you, what you must do, what you mustn't do in certain situations. And you can use that policy as a standard to determine the standard of performance of an employee. You can also use that to determine in a disciplinary hearing, to determine was it fair, the discipline for that person, that staff member, or not. What was the standard of a performance? Did she know there was a policy? Did she had access to the policy of that specific policy? And if it's not, if it is available and she's aware of that and she's got access to that, then they can make a different judgment as if she's not. So she said she hasn't seen the policy, she didn't know there's a policy, or there isn't even a policy to support the issue that they're disciplining her for in the institution. And you can use it, the standard of performance, you can use that when you do performance appraisal as well. Then help to build employees' enthusiasm and loyalty. As I said earlier, if they feel that there's consistency, they've all been treated equally, and there's specific standards that they know what they should do, then they feel more at home, they feel more loyal to the company. Promote consistency of actions and stability. The actions must be the same that's been described in the policy. Doesn't matter who's dealing with it. And so it gives you stability. So then the second last one is that similar problems do not have to be addressed repeatedly. If you have that problem and you formulate a policy to solve the problem, you don't have to go back and readdress it and address it and address it. It's everything is in the policy, and they have to accept the guidelines in the policy. And then the last one, conserve time by setting standards. Now, this is also important. Some people will say, but how can I conserve time by having a policy? How can that happen? It can. It can save you a lot of time. For example, if you're working on night duty in a unit and all of a sudden there's a patient who died, but it's a suspected unnatural death. Now, you don't get exposed to these type of deaths quite often. And there's a lot of criteria that you have to follow. There's a lot of documents that you have to copy. There's a lot of actions. You can't just phone the police and just report it. There's a lot of things you have to do before you get to that point. So if you have a policy of how to manage suspected unnatural deaths, then you can just go to the policy, take it out, follow it step by step, and you won't have a mistake, or you will know exactly what to do. If you don't have that policy, or you're not aware of that policy and don't know where it is, you don't have access, then usually the staff will go to the friend or the colleague next to and ask, do you know how we deal with this? No. Do the next one. Do you know? And in the end, they can end up phoning a person outside, phoning the manager outside to ask, what do we do now? That's time that they wasted. That is also telephone calls. That's the cost that they could save if they don't have to do that. So that is why it's so important to have this policies that set you the standards that can make it very easy for you to act immediately. Now let's look at, sorry, the top part is there, not there, but this is the policy making cycle. And this is coming from National Policy Development Framework of 2020. I found it last year, and it's very similar to what I'm telling you, and what's in the books and what we experience. And this cycle as what we're going to talk about further. Now, right at the end of this presentation, I've got the link to the National Policy Development Framework for you, where you can click and please download it for you. It's very valuable. They even give you at the end examples of formats that you can use for policy formulation if you don't have a standard format in your institution. And it guides you how to do, what to do it, and how to do it. Excuse me, that's my little dog now. So let's look at the first one. The first one is policy formulation. And the policy formulation is where you start. And it's set up start with the agenda setting. And the setting is about diagnosis of policy problems and policy analysis. And it's also the second step is policy design. And then the third one is your monitoring and evaluation data. Then once you've formulated your policy, then you must go send it for approval. And it must go to the relevant policy approval bodies to adopt that and justify it. And from there on, it goes to the policy implementation. You must have an implementation plan, and that's very difficult. And I will tell you later, we've got problems with the implementation as far as I'm concerned of policies, specifically national policies. Then resources of capacity, you need the resources, you need capacity, you must make sure that is applicable, and we're going to talk about that later as well. And then monitoring and evaluation plan, you need that because there needs to be evaluation, that's the last step, where they look at impact assessment, monitoring and evaluation data, and then there's different types of policies, policy evaluation. They can look, it can be, for example, diagnostic, it can be design, can be for the implementation, they look at economic and impact evaluation. How I describe it usually, that's more understandable for the staff, for the nurses, is that it's like if you at the universities, you've got different two components of evaluation. The one is your formative evaluation that is done while the teaching and learning is on the way, and then you've got your summative, that's your exam. Now in this case it's exactly the same, but there are more types of evaluation. So while they formulating the policy, they can start with a formative evaluation and see, are they in line with the budget? Are the goals and objectives set out correctly and clear? And what are they achieving? Will it be successful? And then the formative or the summative will be right at the end, usually with the implementation, where they see if it's really the implementation is supporting what they've actually did the design and of the formulation and the whole formulation process. Is it really reaching the outcome that they're supposed to reach and they've actually foreseen that they're going to get? So that is the different types of policies that you can use. There's also in the this cycle, it never stops. It starts with policy, goes on to adoption, to implementation, evaluation, and then you have to evaluate. With the evaluation, you pick up there's some problems. You have to analyze that policy, and then you get back to policy formulation. You have to do reformulation, or sometimes formulate a new policy. That's not very common, but it can happen. And then you go on in the circle. So assessment of policies are very important. And the requirements for policy analysis. And this is now applicable to the nursing managers. The first skill that you need is problem-solving skill. You need a problem-solving skill because you must know specific techniques how to solve that specific problem. And you must also be able to comprehend what's going on. And then you have to comment on other policies as well, look at other policies. And that's exactly what we do when we've got a problem in the institution. We have to solve it. The second one is implementation skills. You must know how to implement policies. We do implementation of different aspects in the hospital as well. When there's a new type of equipment that we need to teach and make the staff aware of and train them, it's the implementation skills that we actually have to apply there. Then assessment and evaluation skills. We must look at the existing and ongoing government programs. And the evaluation, I'm not going to say further because we've just mentioned the different types of evaluations and assessments. Then management skills. We all, if you're on a manager level, you all have to write reports, have to write monthly reports, etc. And you must be able to evaluate proposals, handle personnel matters. The same will happen with a policy. Communication skills, finding or recommendations to clients and top management that you must report to them. And the last one, team building and operational skills. You must run meetings. You must have informative sessions, and you must have the team buildings as well, getting them together as teams and work with teams. So you as a nursing manager or as a nurse, if you look at those requirements, don't be scared to do an analysis of the policy. Utilize those requirements, and you will find it very interesting to if you analyze a policy. And I'm going to mention you later on what I did with one of the assignments for my students as far as analysis is concerned. Now let's get to policy formulation. Policy formulation is from analysis to authorization. You analyze it, the policy after you formulate it, and then it must go for approval. And it's also to lead into alternative policies in decision making. When you formulate a policy, you must go consider other alternative policies. Always ask you, isn't there an alternative policy? Isn't there, is it linked to an alternative policy? Decision making is very important, and it's difficult to make decisions. And it's not only one person that can make the decisions on the formulation of a policy, what they're going to, how they're going to create it, so how they're going to create the policy, what will the content be. Effective analysis may reveal shortcomings in formulation or implementation or new problems. Now, if you do that analysis correctly, you will see that there's, in most of the policies that I experienced, there's some or other shortcoming, either with the implementation or with the formulation. Now, what I've asked my students when I lectured them on health policy management, one of the assignments that I've just mentioned was that they have to get permission from the nursing manager in the institution where they work to analyze one of the policies in the institution. And it must be in writing, it must be submitted, that I can be sure she's doing it with the permission of the manager. And then they must go through that and they must read and see what they can pick up. Are there any shortcomings? Are there any gaps in the policy? And it was I actually enjoyed it because it was very interesting to see what they picked up in that policies. before what type of gaps can it be? The one can be that the way that that policy is written, the guideline is written, is very vague and it's open for misinterpretation. And that is not a good idea. That is, you have to make it specific that everybody can understand what they're saying, that it's not confusing for them. Another gap that I found is that what they actually put in the policy, the criteria, is not completely it's not completely focused on what they're doing. So so there are gaps in there that they have to fill. Then also from the implementation side is that the implementation wasn't successful, and there's a gap there because they see now the implementation, the formulation, and they've implemented in the institution, but then they realize when they do the analysis, but we're not really doing the implementation of implemented their specific policy. There are gaps. We do it slightly different. Or they can also find that they're doing a little bit more than what the policy is asking for. That's latest information that they receive. Then that's a gap that needs to be added to the policy. And then you have to reformulate the policy. It's important to have a team for decision making if you formulate the policy. Now, why do they have teams? You can't decide, make huge, important decisions on the policy on your own. You need people around you. You need people that can add value with the decision making. And the reason for that, why the decision making is so important that we've got this whole team, is that we are different people. We are not the same. We are different from each other. We have different value systems. Our perceptions, is based on our backgrounds, are different. There's different beliefs that they've got. So each one has got their own way of thinking. And maybe one person come with another direction that's very valuable, and they can utilize it. And there's also what I call the human ability, where not the people involved with the policy formulation must now gather data to make a decision on what is important in the policy. But they don't have the time to go and do research, go and find out, and to do see what other countries are doing, what other provinces are doing, and they just quickly get only the information that they think is important and not going further. So that is also one of the problems that we get with the decision making, and it's important that we look out for that. If you've in your group, you can't do it on your own. If you go to do it on your own, you're going to have a time problem. You won't have enough time, and you will go that short route of not doing a proper investigation and get more information. Then the team, they must work together, and then after they decide and formulated the policy, they must all approve of the draft. And they must prepare it for proposal and make recommendations for the approval of that policy. Policy agenda setting is very important. It's a crucial phase. And there are three main reasons why it's so important. It defines and prioritizes policy issues to be addressed. And it determines who influences and control the policy-making process. And lastly, it determines how stakeholder influences the agenda. Now, what is the agenda? Let's take you back to why we need policies and where government policies are coming from. There's a society. The society's got a problem, a perceived problem, and they got different needs, and they're unhappy, and they want it to change. They want to solve the problems. There's always speakers on their behalf. Sometimes you get the situation where it's only a small group, an elite group, that's talking on behalf of the society. And that happens quite a lot because you can't get the whole of society together and then, involve all of them in this agenda setting or to approach the government to address the problems that they experience. So once they've got all they're talking on behalf and they make a decision, they will send it to government and they will ask to be put on the agenda for discussion. And we all have agendas. We've just started off with the agenda, and usually the very important components we put higher up on the agenda, and then it gets discussed by government, and they will decide then, are we going to solve this problem? What do we need? Do we need a policy, or how are we going to deal with this? Or is it something that doesn't need a policy? And most of the policies that you've got is coming from that. One of the policies that I can give you an example is the policy that came out a couple of years ago from government on the reducing of patient waiting times at outpatients department and clinics, primary healthcare clinics and other clinics. And in that situation, the society, the people in society, they were very unhappy because they will go to the clinic at 4 o'clock in the morning, sitting in a row. There's already a long row sitting there, and they have to wait. And at the end of the day, they can't be seen, and they must go, must come back. And it's not fair. It's cold in the winter, it's hot in the summer, and there's not enough staff, and they can't deal with that. So they came out, and government said that during they got that as an agenda, this is a real problem. This is a real issue that needs to be dealt with immediately. And then they go and formulate this policy. And they have to determine the influences or control of the policy making process, how they're going to, who's going to be responsible with the policy making process, and then look at the stakeholders as well. It's a way, policy agenda is a way of understanding the relationship between issues and agenda. Now, what are issues? Because we talk, when you say society's got the problems, we usually call it they've got an issue. There's issues in the society. Let's go to the next. I think it's about issues. What can be considered as policy issues and why? It's a topic that generates attention due to different opinions in the society. It's coming from public debates, and people have different opinions, which may lead to lengthy, intense debates. And that debate, there's a lot of power when they've got this lengthy discussion, because some of these debates is very, how can I say it? It's very hard, it's lengthy, it's a lot of emotions, and because I don't agree with each other. And that power that it generates forces from the forces in society influence the agenda. So you get this problem, one or two or small group of people decide to address this problem, and there's some people that's for that problem solving in a matter, the other one's not against it. One of the problems, examples that I can give you, and they can think back, is many years ago, is when the termination of pregnancies, before that came in, how forceful they were. One group was for the termination of pregnancy, and the one was against it because of different reasons and their religion and so forth. And there was so much debate going on, and they became angry, and there was a long discussion, and they sometimes getting very verbal with each other, and it's really forceful situation. So that is an issue, a problem that becomes an issue that you need to address as a problem. There are general approaches that, and I pasted this on the government again, to attend to approach, the general approaches to the agenda setting. If I get the agenda setting, there are three. The one is a passive role where they just got the feeling, just let it happen. I'm just sitting, let's just see where it's going, what's happening. The second one is a proactive and assisted approach. And with that one, there's an attitude of encourage it to happen. Let's support them. Let's encourage them to happen. Let's put it on this agenda setting. But sometimes you will find that what's behind this is that there's a bias. There's people that's biased, and they already make decisions for them for how they're going to assist them. Then the last one is government actively involved, where they said, we're not necessarily going to wait for this problem to come on the agenda. We know it's going to end. We know it's a problem. So let's start and make it happen. Let's start with it before they get to us. So those are the issues. So you can see that the policy is not just a thumbs up or just one feeling. It comes from what's going on in the government with issues and problems that they have to solve. Policy design is the next step in policy formulation. Now, the policy design is what government wants to do or decide to do and decide not to do to encounter this public policy problem in society. So it's saying policy design is what to do or not to do with a perceived problem. And when you're doing the design, the same will be, what must I do with this problem or what must I not do with the problem? Then intellectual and financial resources are converted into a plan of action. Now, take for the design, you must look at your intellectual resources, you must look at your financial resources, and do I have that to convert it into a plan of action? Then it's also the policy design leads you and stimulates you to do research. And that's also one of the aspects that I found when there's policy that's been formulated in an institution by the nursing manager or the CEO or even the operational manager, that they sometimes don't do research. They just go about what they think and what they experience and what they see. But we must think wider if you do a policy design. You must go and do research and see what research has been done on that specific problem. And you must find out what has been done, what other hospitals or institutions are doing, what other provinces are doing, what's internationally acceptable to deal with this problem. And that must guide you. Look, and then further, you must also go back to your legislations and look at specifically the SANC regulations. Then setting of clear goals and objectives and a prioritizing of the goals and objectives is part of the policy design. After you've done that, you follow the steps and you did your research, then now you must come up to set clear goals for the policy. And you must also set clear objectives for the policy. Now, there's a difference between the goals and objectives. And in nursing, I don't know you, but very often people confused with goals and objectives. They don't understand what is a goal and what is an objective. Now, in this policy design, the goal will be very broadly stated, where the objective will be very concrete. So exactly what it is. Further, the goal It's a very formal way of writing, and the objective will be focused on operational aspects, will be very operational. Then the goals, if you look at them again, they're unspecified, very vague principles. And the objective is very specific. And it's got very specific detailed actions that they want to take. So the goals is, let's say, covering the objectives, which working towards the goals. If you see how specific they are and how concrete they are, and we're working with the objectives most of the time. That's where we want to be. We want to achieve those objectives because they will lead to the goals that's been set. Then anticipate the future scenario event, in other words, do forecasting. You have to think, if you've got your goals and objectives, you have to think about the future. What's going to happen in the future? And it's difficult to look into the future, but you can't just, like I said previously, look at what's happening now. You must look a little bit further, do forecasting, so that you are ready for if anything happens in the future. Analyzing cost benefits and cost effectiveness. You must look at, well, this design that I've got, how I will want to approach this policy. Will it be cost effective? Is it cost benefits? Or is it not going to be cost effective? You must do your homework and you must determine that and see if it's not going to be cost effective, then you must go back and you must make changes for that. And it's important to look at cost effectiveness. Now let's get to policy implementation. Policy implementation is a very it sounds easy. It sounds you're going to implement something. We implement a lot of things in our careers, but it's not as easy with policies. And just to give you an idea, one of the lectures that I gave to the students, I had a guest, as a very good friend of mine, is involved, is also at the university, and he's been involved with policy issues. And specifically with the formulation of policy and with the implementation of policy, and he's got a huge amount of knowledge about policies. He's also a lawyer, but his focus is now moved to other aspects. So I asked him, he gave us a lecture or told us some information, and then I had questions that I asked on behalf of the students. So I asked him, what do you think is the problem with policies? Is it where lies the problem with the policies that's in the institutions? And without thinking, he said implementation. I said, why implementation? He said, no, they did the research, they visited institutions and the hospitals, and the implementation is always problematic of the policies. And I've experienced it as well, and I'm sure you experience it. You receive the policy from the authorities, comes down to you, say you're the operational manager in the ward, and you look at it and you see it and you actually file it, and then they said you must implement it, but no effort has been made of implementation, or not an intense effort to implement that. And that is one of the problems we're sitting with. So what does policy, and it's a very vague topic, the implementation of the policy. And there was a lot of debates on what it is really from authors, not from other people, from authors. So implementation includes all the activities that you've got in your design, and it also, and that you've got approval from the authorities and from the government division. So all of them are included in the implementation. So the first point there, the conversion of physical and financial resources into concrete service delivery outputs in the form of facilities and services to achieve policy objectives. So in that implementation, you've got resources, and resources is in a concrete service delivery output that you put it. So you want that output to be successful. Then it involves all the activities designed to carry out the policy enacted by the legislative branch. Just mention that. Coordinates resources and personnel to achieve the intended goals. Coordination is very important in implementation, and you will see it with the next slide, why. And you must coordinate the personnel and the resources if you want to be successful. Operational feasibility. Now, will it be feasible for the operation, for the institution to apply, to implement this policy? Or is it not going to be feasible to do that? They also, you have to look at the capacity. Is a capacity that can actually help you to implement this policy? Or is a problem, the capacity not efficient to implement this problem as it's supposed to be? And then the value of policies. Now, the value of policies is that the strategy must be sustainable. And in other words, it means that the goals produced for service render to be of value for the clients. If it's not going to be value for the clients, it's not going to be a valuable policy. You must also look at how you're going to implement it. Now, usually policies, national policies implemented through either program or projects. And they will say to you, will hear quite often that say, we're busy with a project, or we're going to start a project for the next 3 months, or we've got a program that we're going to run. And that is the implementation of the policy where they, in an institution, usually they first implement to see, to identify gaps in that, to see whether they have to change before they're going wilder. And you can think about some of the aspects that they, of components that actually, some of the implementation systems that they use that failed so far is your health, I'm stuck now, your national health systems that they wanted to implement. So, so that is also part of it. You know how to deal with a project, and you know how to deal with programs. Programs is a longer term, but then projects is sort of built on the program, and it's just a shorter term that they're busy with that. Then there's a top-down and a bottom-up approach. Now, this is a very old approach that they ask with and they debate about. And what that means, the top-down, we all know the top-down approach of policy implementation. And it's a very dominant one. It starts with the top level of government, and they ask them questions when they implement it. There's specific questions they want to see. They will see this consistency. They will see that they obtain the objectives, and they must want to know the policy formulating over hours, how many hours, how much time they needed for that, and so forth. And that is what they evaluate. The top bottom-up approach is people that's actually acting to the bottom-down approach. And what they do, they identify weaknesses in that policy implementation, and they looked at what they can pick up that's an issue or weakness, and then they make suggestions of alternatives how they can deal with those weaknesses, and that's the bottom up. With the implementation, there's a protocol they call the 7 C's. And I've put this on because I think it can be valuable for you and can help you if you have to implement a policy. The 7 C's is 7 interlinked variables which allow a better understanding of implementation. And these variables influence each other depending on the specific implementation situation. Now, the first one is that we look at is the content of the policy. The content of the policy is, and that is now when you do the implementation, you must look at the content of the policy and look what are the goals, are the causal theories, methods, what are the methods to solve the problem, what has been set out in the policy, in other words, what are the goals, what are the objectives, what does the policy want to achieve, and from there you look at the context. What is the nature of the institution? Will the institution be able to deal with that content? What are the different corridors? We call it corridors in the institution through which this policy has to go for approval. So if the hospital, the institution, nature is not applicable for that content, then you're going to have problems with the implementation. So the context of the institution is very important. Then the commitment. There must be a person takes responsibility or being given the responsibility to implement the policy. And if they're not totally committed or they don't believe in the policy, then it's not going to be successful. So you have to look out for that and then appoint another person that they can use as the person who's going to implement it. Then capacity. You need administrative capacity. You need your resources. You need your equipment. You need your employees and personnel. And if you don't have that, you can't implement it. For example, that I can give you that there's a policy that came out with that I've mentioned earlier about the waiting time of patients at outpatients and in institutions. Some of the staff in clinics and rural clinics specifically said to me, but they couldn't implement it because they don't have the capacity. They don't have additional staff to work with patients, to see the patients like what has been set out in the policy, in the national policy, the government policy. And they don't have a specific space, additional space to accommodate an additional staff. And then there's equipment that they need. So one must look at that as well. And a lot of that specific policy on the waiting time of patients wasn't implemented successfully because of these constraints that they've got. They didn't have the capacity to fulfill all the requirements in the policy. Then you must look at the clients and coalitions. Do they support this policy? Let's go back to the waiting time of the patients. Did the clients, those are the society, people in society that utilize the clinics, did they support that? And yes, they definitely supported because they were desperate. But what happened afterwards, that is the question if they don't implement it correctly. And they must look at strategies as well. What strategies can they bring to you? The communication of policies is crucial again. You must communicate the goals, objectives, as well as the roles of the different people and what you expect from them, what's their responsibilities, what they must do and what they're responsible for. And that must be clearly set out for them. Otherwise, it's not going to be implementation. It's not going to be successful. Then the last one is coordination. You have to coordinate your policies, your strategies, your plans of various stakeholders to optimize the impact. Look at the outcome, the final outcome, the impact that it's going to have. Now, if you going to implement a policy, I think it will be worthwhile, makes sense to look at those 7 C's and ask questions and see if they are ready to implement it in the correct way. No, it's not going. Sorry.
Just click on the slide with the mouse cursor. It should move.
There we are. This is the last slide that I've got. Thank you, Lesigo. That's the link to the National Policy Development Framework of 2020. And please, it's very valuable. And I think you can get a lot of information. It's a very long document, but it's a detailed document. Then conclusion. Policy formulation and implementation requires time and commitment from people in order to prevent failure. Yes, there are a lot of failures with policy. The reasons for policy failure may be caused by bad policy design and or bad policy implementation. And the bad policy design is usually there's a lack of clear objectives in the design, or the time and resources were inadequate, which I mentioned how important that is to look at that. But the reasons for the failure of implementation of the policy are lack of human resources, huge problem. Lack of material and technology. Again, when I take you back to the waiting time, they don't have the technology, all the institutions. The rural places doesn't have that technology properly, doesn't have any technology. Lack of policy implementation capacity. But I've mentioned the capacity, you must have the capacity, administrative capacity, and major obstacle to effective progress or defect management process, organizational cultures. So to conclude, adequate time must be allocated to the formulation of a policy, and goals and objectives must be clear. With the implementation of the policy, make sure that there are sufficient resources and apply the 7 C's. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope I've opened something in you that you look differently at policies from now on forwards and create your own policy if there's a need in your institution. Formulate it and follow the steps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bestel. This is very, very, very empowering. I think most of the attendees would really, agree with me as I say it. Even when we were preparing, I was thinking, I wonder if health workers would understand the importance of this particular session. But looking at the attendance and also the response in the chat, I think we need to probably even bring it back again and look at some components, of it a little bit in detail. So we really appreciate. So maybe going through some of the questions. I think you may switch on your video. It was turned off during the talk so that people can see you as well.
Oh, they want to see me.
Yeah, I think it was just the last few seconds.
Yes.
In the Q&A box from Dr. Nguza, maybe let's start with that one, because I also wrote it down to say, what is the difference between policy and then we have guidelines and protocols? And I think from a health worker point of view, we sort of mix these things. Is there a difference between a policy, a guideline, and a protocol?
Okay, thank you. Very good question. If you remember what I said, the policy and our guidelines. So it's the policy and guidelines is actually similar, except the format of the guidelines are different and not always following the steps, but it's the same aspect, the same components, because they're giving us guidelines. What are the other one you asked? Guidelines and protocols.
Yes. Protocols, yes.
Protocols can also, you can also see it as a policy, but for me, a policy is based on the correct format. And sometimes you find that you've got protocols and you've got guidelines, but it's not in the same format. And if you're going to look at the government policies, the national policies that we receive in the government, how detailed they are. It's a lengthy document, but it's valuable because they're giving you the background, the history, the background, and take you further why they want to solve this problem, how they're going to solve it. So, but it getting together those three.
And then someone was saying, and where does quality improvement then? I don't know if you have ever heard about this Plan, Do, Study, Act, PDSA. Where does it all fit in? I'm not sure. It's a space I like, the quality improvement side. Today I was learning, the policy side, but I don't know if you want to make a few comments on it. Yeah.
Okay. What's the risk management she's talking? This person is talking about. Okay. Yeah. Risk management, you actually need a policy for risk management. So risk management should be in the form of a policy where you get all the guidelines, what you should do, not do. And there are the national ones, the standardized one for the whole country, for all the institutions, how they must deal with and prevent risk. Now, from next month, I'm going to talk about standard operating procedures. Link onto policies. If you think about the risk management, that will give you the guidelines what you should do. But how you're going to do it is coming from the standard operating procedures, the SOPs. So that is linked onto the policy. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and you are coming back for that, Hester. Standard operating procedures. I see there's Lynette on the chat. She's saying, since you participated in the confidential inquiry into maternal deaths, were there any findings in line with weaknesses in policies or implementation thereof, which continue to contribute to maternal deaths?
Yes, I've been many years being an assessor for the Western Cape, and I really enjoyed it because my first passion was midwifery. And it was very interesting to do that analysis. I was doing it with professors and with pediatricians, anesthetists, and then we've got the two nurses to do that. And we looked at the nursing side. And a lot of time, we looked at why we looked at the reasons why there were maternal deaths. Was it negligence? Was it a nursing negligence? Was it a doctor's negligence? Did they monitor or they didn't monitor? Or they've got the right diagnosis but the wrong treatment? Or they had the right diagnosis but the wrong diagnosis and the right medication or treatment? So what we found there is that it didn't come as very clearly through that the policies, I didn't follow the policies, but those criteria that we used was based on policies. So, and we could see that they didn't always follow that, the criteria that's in the policies. But it isn't set out. I think if you look now at the National Inquiry into Maternal Deaths, the document that comes out, the documents, you will find that these protocols, guidelines that they've got, that's actually the policy.
I see. Would I be correct to say that just for today, to say SOPs or standard operating procedures generally are put in place to enhance the implementation of the policy? Because statements, I mean, can be quite broad, but maybe an SOP would sort of clarify what we need to do locally in my ward or my clinic to make the policy real or come to life. Yeah,
you're correct. It's like the policy, the goals that's been supported by the objectives. So in this case, we can say, just example, it's a policy supported by SOPs.
And policy, where at which level of the health system should policies be formulated? I mean, nationally it's obvious, but can a hospital have the policy? Can a ward, should a ward develop a policy? I mean, how does it work?
Yeah, no, they can. I'm going to give you and tell you what, I was a nursing manager, of course, at in private hospitals, at 2 different private hospitals, and we have to formulate our policies. Although we've got a head office and these policies coming from them, there was also some need for us to create or to formulate policies. And to give you an idea, that what happened once is that we realized that we need a policy on ethical dilemmas. And that is always very difficult to deal in a hospital. And it's usually the nurses that's got this ethical dilemmas. And there's almost like a conflict between the doctors and the nursing person there. So we started and we formulated a policy on ethical issues and ethical dilemmas, how to deal with it, that they can all know how to deal with it. And we implemented that. And then head office came and do their usual rounds, and they found out about this policy, and they took it to the head office and they created a policy for the whole company. That was different from the one that we've created. But then when it came back to us, they was actually saying that we need, for ethical issues, you need an ethical committee. But it wasn't practical, you know, to get an ethical committee, because it's ethical in the private sector. Ethical committee needed for doctors, and this one for nursing side. So we wrote an addendum to support that and say that in our hospital, we're going to do the ethical committee on an ad hoc basis. So why I'm saying this is, yes, you can, if there is a need, a problem in your institution, of, then you can formulate, like I've mentioned it, you can formulate a policy for your specific institution to solve that problem. And sometimes it's not very, it's very simple things. One example that I had experienced as well is that, and that's in the new hospital that we opened, is that the nursing managers, we have the criteria, or with the nursing unit managers, that's the operational managers, that they have to cover the hospitals after hours, over weekends, and on holidays. And there was they will circulate each other time to do it. And then they control it themselves. They wanted to control it. And then there was a conflict situation. So we got together and we said, okay, now we're going to write a policy on how to deal with this. and we implement it. So sometimes it's not it's a very simple problem that you can't solve unless you've got guidelines for them. So you can do it. But if the operational manager wants to formulate a policy for her unit, she must communicate with the nursing manager that she's reporting to, because maybe the nursing manager knows about exactly the same problem in other departments that she feels that let's do one for the whole institution, for all the units, not only for one unit.
Interesting. And I'm sometimes part of quality assessments, whether it's national core standards or even program specific assessments. And generally, as part of the assessment, you'll find that there's the standard requiring a certain policy to be in place, and it's not. And people generally say they don't have time. I saw Dr. Anguza asking as well. He says, so, how do we make time for problem solving in the first place?
That's difficult. That's difficult. And, you can't rush it.
Yes.
But I must be honest, when we opened the new hospital, I had to rush with the policy because there was nothing. There was not even a head office. There was nothing. It was the first private hospital in that group. So we had to rush it. But then afterwards, we had to change it. We have to, look at it again.
Yeah, and adapt. So there was compliance first. Then,
yes.
Then you had a bit more time to then said how to make sure that these policies are relevant for our context. Okay, interesting. And with regards to the review process, is there a specific minimum time or should I say maximum time? I'm not sure. But how often should the policies be reviewed once developed and signed off? Is there a specific recommended time?
There are different approaches to that. Some people, they will, when they formulate the policy, you put in the time that the next, that you have to look at it, say, 1 year or 2 years. It's not practical. I believe that if you look at the policy, 5 years, because 1 year, it's really not practical. 2 years is not practical. Time is running out. It's a lot of policies that you have to look at. So what we did in it also is we listed all the policies in the institution, in the hospital where I work, the private one. And then we, as sort of almost like a calendar, to say, okay, next year, this one must be reviewed, that one, and that one, and that one. So we scatter that you're not having all of them at the same time. So you can plan that. And that is what I would want to suggest. I think that is a better way to deal with it, and it will be practical. Yes, but at 5 years, time is running out of it, unless you get a problem, a change in that problem before the 5 year or the year, then you have to change it immediately.
Superb. So Lucky feels that he's not engaged enough. So he's asking what channels are generally used to engage hospital staff, health workers in the process, or is this process delegated to hospital management only?
You're talking about the policies.
Yes, because he's saying, probably in the front lines, and he's asking, maybe he's saying, I've never been engaged. So, how do we get health workers to participate in the development of these policies to be, yeah.
Okay. It depends on the problem that's going to be solved, what type of policy it is. If it's a policy that's coming from the nursing manager, I'm talking about the nursing now, nursing manager or the hospital manager, then they will look at the type of problem and they will get the appropriate people involved in the team to formulate the policy. Sometimes, let's take, for example, very simple example again. Look at the dress codes of the staff. In the private sector, we don't have a standard dress code like you have in government. And then you want to be fair to all the staff, of the nursing staff. So you will then look and include from the operational manager, nursing manager, operational manager, senior managers, registered nurses, and maybe some of the categories as well, but the correct person to have an input in that you actually acknowledge all of them. But if it's not something that's so important for all the staff, then you don't include the lower categories. That you include the people that you think can add value and add experience with this problem, and think laterally, and come up with different approach. That's what you're looking for.
Superb.
So if you want to get involved, who is that person that asked?
Lucky.
Lucky, if you want to get involved, make yourself available.
Yeah.
Okay.
Superb. So make yourself available, Lucky. Then we shall reach out and we shall ensure that you are involved and engaged. Yeah. So Hester, thank you very much, for today's session. Before I ask you for actually as part of your closing remarks, is there a specific advice you would give to the Minister of Health around the policy implementation? What would be that one or two priority things you think if we get them right, then we are likely to have policies that are implementable or start to see results of our policies?
Yeah. It's a difficult, from my point of view, I think, to get it implemented properly. I would say that I don't know who's been involved in formulation of the policy from the Department of Health. But all that I can tell you, when I was a midwife and we had a conference, we made suggestions to the Department of Health about midwives and midwifery, and they ignored us. And what I feel that should be done, if they have that, to involve the people who are experiencing it, people that is prepared to give their input in what is going on in the area. For example, if we go into that waiting time of the patients, I don't know who they involved and where they got the information from, or did they do inspection? I don't know it, but they should involve in the different provinces. Have a person, a senior person, who can sort of evaluate, because the services are so different. The capacity that they've got and the resources that they've got are different, depend on what type of it is. Now, so it's a difficult answer, but I think they must acknowledge people in the let's say in the provinces that's knowledgeable about that specific topic or problem.
Yes. Super,
but it's tough. I know it's tough. Lucky is like, where's Lucky working?
Lucky still here. Where are you working? I wonder where Lucky is working from.
I want
to be like, let's say, Lucky, are you able to unmute? I'm putting you on spot, Lucky. Are you able to unmute?
Oh, there he is. There he is.
Is able to unmute. Lucky, you can talk to us. I don't know if you are in a safe space to talk. No, I don't think he's able to.
I want to say to Lucky, if you're interested in coming involved in the policy formulation. Maybe the two of us can stand together and get Lesego in as well. I don't know what policy we're going to formulate, but we can work together.
Yeah, I see. He says he's from Emelo Hospital in Mpumalanga. Yeah, and I think maybe because there was a comment about some people asking for a practical demonstration of a policy analysis or whatever that are possible virtually. So maybe in the follow-up, we can have few policies, maybe send them before time for people to read, and then we come back here and we sort of go through the process. And I think it will be a bit practical as well for people to understand the process and what it takes. Yeah.
I like your suggestion. I think it's a very good suggestion, yeah. Because it's not practical now what I gave them, but it let them think. But it will be, I'm forward to have a practical session, yeah.
Superb. And I see a lot of thumbs going up, so it means people are very interested in that. Yeah, okay, Hestel, thank you very much. You may say your closing remarks, and then after that, I will say one or two announcements to the audience, and then we call it a night. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lesego, and thank you for you that's asking questions. I can see that it's actually, you've got a lot of questions about the policy. And to close, for me, policy, when I started off at the University of Stellenbosch, I wasn't a lecturer for policy management. And then they asked me to take it over. And now I've got a passion for policies, policies and SOPs. And I would like, it will be such a happy day for me if you all take this home and start thinking about it and start, see what you can do. And I think the solution or the what Lesego's just said, that maybe we must have a practical session. I really like that, because that's the best way to look in detail and realize how you can deal with the policies, how you can analyze them. So all the best for you, and thank you for listening to me.